Have you ever noticed how exhausting it feels when you share every detail of your life with others? That constant need to explain your choices, your struggles, your victories? What if I told you that one of the most revolutionary acts you can perform is simply staying quiet? Carl Gustav Jung, the legendary Swiss psychiatrist who gave us concepts like the collective unconscious and psychological types, had profound insights about the power of silence and selective sharing. Jung understood something that modern social media culture has forgotten. Not everything you experience needs an audience. In today's hyper-connected world, we're conditioned to broadcast our lives constantly. We share our morning coffee, our relationship drama, our career moves, and even our most intimate thoughts. But Jung's psychological wisdom reveals a different path, one where silence becomes a source of strength, where privacy preserves your energy, and where selective sharing actually deepens your relationships rather than diluting them. Throughout his extensive work analyzing the human psyche, Jung discovered that our constant need to externalize our experiences often stems from deeper psychological patterns. Sometimes we share to seek validation, other times to process emotions, and often simply because we've lost touch with our own inner compass. But here's what Jung knew that most people don't. When you constantly tell others what's happening in your life, you're not just sharing information. You're giving away pieces of your personal power. You're allowing external opinions to shape your internal reality. You're making yourself vulnerable to energy vampires who feed off drama and chaos. Jung believed that true psychological maturity comes from developing what he called individuation, the process of integrating different aspects of your personality and becoming your authentic self. And a crucial part of this journey involves learning when to speak and when to remain silent. If you're ready to discover how silence can transform your life and relationships, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We dive deep into psychological wisdom that can genuinely change how you navigate the world. Today, we're exploring 15 powerful lessons inspired by Jung's teachings about why you should stop constantly telling everyone what's happening in your life. These aren't just philosophical concepts. They're practical tools that can help you build emotional independence, preserve your energy, and create the kind of authentic relationships Jung believed were essential for psychological well-being. The first lesson might surprise you because it challenges everything our culture tells us about transparency and openness. Lesson 1. Your inner world needs protection. Jung emphasized that each person has an inner sanctuary, a private psychological space where your deepest thoughts, dreams, and intuitions reside. When you constantly share what's happening in your life, you're essentially opening the doors to this sacred space and allowing others to walk through it freely. Think of your inner world like a garden. Every time you share intimate details with people who haven't earned that privilege, you're letting strangers trample through your carefully tended psychological landscape. Jung believed that this inner sanctuary is where your individuation process unfolds, where you discover who you truly are beneath social expectations and external pressures. Protecting this space doesn't mean becoming secretive or dishonest. It means being intentional about who gets access to your deepest self. Jung often spoke about the importance of psychological boundaries, and one of the strongest boundaries you can create is the choice of selective sharing. Lesson 2. Silence prevents energy leaks. Every time you explain your life to others, you're expending psychological energy. Jung understood that our psychic energy is finite and precious. When you constantly justify your choices, defend your decisions, or seek validation for your experiences, you're creating what Jung might call energy leaks. These energy leaks are particularly draining when you share with people who don't truly understand or support you. Have you ever noticed how exhausted you feel after explaining a personal situation to someone who responds with judgment, unsolicited advice, or dismissive comments? That's your psychological energy being drained. Jung believed in the concept of psychological economy, the idea that we must manage our mental and emotional resources wisely. By practicing selective silence, you preserve this energy for the things that truly matter: your personal growth, your meaningful relationships, and your creative pursuits. Lesson 3. Other people's opinions become internal noise. Here's something Jung discovered through decades of psychological practice. When you constantly share your experiences, you inevitably collect other people's opinions about your life. These opinions don't just disappear, they become part of your internal dialogue. Jung called this phenomenon psychological contamination. Every time someone gives you their perspective on your situation, their voice joins the chorus in your head. Soon, you're not just dealing with your own thoughts and feelings. You're processing everyone else's reactions, judgments, and advice. This creates what Jung would recognize as a fragmented psychological state. Instead of developing your own clear perspective on your experiences, you become confused by competing external viewpoints. You lose touch with your intuition and inner wisdom because they're drowned out by other people's voices. The solution isn't to never seek advice or support. It's to be highly selective about whose opinions you invite into your psychological space. Jung believed that we should only give significant weight to perspectives from people who truly understand us and have our best interests at heart. Lesson 4. Silence builds psychological strength. Jung discovered something counterintuitive about human psychology. The ability to keep your own counsel is actually a sign of psychological maturity and strength. When you can sit with your experiences without immediately needing to share them, you're developing what Jung called psychological containment. This containment isn't about suppression or denial. It's about having the emotional capacity to process your experiences internally before deciding whether or not to share them externally. Jung observed that people who constantly need to externalize their experiences often lack this internal processing capacity. Think about it this way. When you can hold your emotions, thoughts, and experiences within yourself, even temporarily, you're demonstrating that you trust your own psychological resources. You're showing that you don't need external validation to make sense of your life. This self-reliance is at the core of what Jung considered psychological health. The strongest people Jung encountered in his practice weren't those who shared everything, but those who had developed the capacity to be alone with their thoughts and feelings without becoming overwhelmed. Lesson 5. Mystery preserves your personal power. Jung understood that there's tremendous psychological power in maintaining an element of mystery about yourself. When people know everything about your life, your struggles, your plans, your fears, your victories, they unconsciously begin to categorize and predict you. This isn't necessarily malicious. It's simply how the human mind works. We create mental models of the people around us based on the information they provide. The more information you give, the more complete their model becomes, and the more they feel they know you. But Jung recognized that being truly known is different from being completely transparent. When you maintain some privacy about your inner world, you preserve what Jung might call your psychological sovereignty. You remain unpredictable, complex, and ultimately unknowable in ways that keep people intrigued rather than taking you for granted. This mystery isn't about being deceptive or manipulative. It's about recognizing that your depth as a human being doesn't need to be fully displayed to be real. Jung believed that the most interesting and psychologically rich people always maintained some degree of unknowability, even to their closest companions. Lesson 6. Sharing everything dilutes meaningful connections. Here's a paradox that Jung would have appreciated. The more you share with everyone, the less special your sharing becomes with anyone. When you tell your struggles to your coworker, your neighbor, your social media followers, and your closest friend, you're essentially putting all these relationships on the same level. Jung believed deeply in the importance of psychological intimacy. The gradual, careful sharing of your inner world with select people who have earned that privilege through trust, understanding, and mutual respect. This kind of intimacy requires differentiation. It requires treating different relationships differently. When you practice selective sharing, the moments when you do choose to open up become more meaningful. Your closest friends and family members understand that when you share something personal with them, it's a gift, not just information you're broadcasting to everyone in your circle. Jung observed that people who overshare often struggle to form deep connections because they've eliminated the natural progression of intimacy that comes with gradually revealing yourself to others over time. Lesson 7. Your dreams and aspirations need incubation time. Jung spent decades studying dreams and the unconscious mind, and he discovered something crucial about how our aspirations develop. He found that sharing your dreams and goals too early in their development can actually weaken them psychologically. When you tell everyone about your plans, whether it's a career change, a creative project, or a personal transformation, you're exposing these tender psychological seedlings to external energies before they've had time to take root in your unconscious mind. Jung believed that our deepest aspirations need what he called incubation time in the darkness of our inner world. Think of how a seed grows. It doesn't immediately break through the soil and announce itself to the world. It spends time in the dark, drawing nutrients from the earth, developing its root system, building strength. Only when it's ready does it emerge into the light. Your dreams work the same way. When you share them too early, you invite other people's doubts, fears, and limitations into your psychological space. Even well-meaning friends might inadvertently plant seeds of doubt or offer realistic perspectives that can sabotage your unconscious development of the idea. Jung would advise keeping your dreams close to your chest until they've gained enough psychological momentum to withstand external scrutiny. Lesson 8. Silence protects you from projection. One of Jung's most important discoveries was the concept of psychological projection, the unconscious tendency to see our own issues, fears, and unresolved conflicts in other people. When you constantly share what's happening in your life, you become a blank screen onto which others project their own psychological material. For example, if you tell someone about a relationship challenge you're facing, they might respond based on their own relationship wounds rather than your actual situation. If you share a career decision, they might project their own fears about security or success onto your circumstances. Jung understood that most advice isn't really about you. It's about the person giving it. When someone hears about your life, they unconsciously filter it through their own experiences, traumas, and belief systems. Then they offer you guidance that's really meant for themselves. By practicing selective sharing, you protect yourself from becoming the recipient of other people's unprocessed psychological material. You avoid taking on advice that was never really meant for your situation in the first place. Lesson 9. Internal processing develops wisdom. Jung believed that wisdom comes from the ability to sit with uncertainty, to hold contradictions, and to allow understanding to emerge from within, rather than seeking answers externally. When you immediately share every experience, you shortcut this internal processing mechanism. The act of sharing often gives us the illusion that we've processed an experience, when really, we've just externalized it. Jung would argue that true psychological integration requires sitting with your experiences long enough to extract their deeper meaning and lessons. When you keep certain experiences to yourself, you're forced to develop your own understanding of what happened and why. You learn to trust your inner wisdom rather than relying on external validation or interpretation. This builds what Jung called psychological maturity, the ability to be your own counselor and guide. Some of the most profound insights Jung had about human nature came not from immediate sharing or discussion, but from years of patient observation and internal reflection on his experiences with patients and his own psychological development. Lesson 10. Oversharing attracts drama and chaos. Jung observed a fascinating pattern in human behavior. People who constantly share their personal dramas tend to attract more drama into their lives. This isn't coincidence, it's psychology in action. When you broadcast your problems, conflicts, and emotional turmoil, you unconsciously signal to others that drama is welcome in your life. Jung would explain this through his understanding of psychological resonance. People are drawn to others who vibrate at similar emotional frequencies. If you're constantly talking about chaos, uncertainty, and problems, you'll naturally attract people who thrive on these energies, including those who create drama as a way of feeling alive or important. Conversely, when you maintain a certain level of privacy about your challenges, you naturally repel drama-seeking individuals. People who feed off chaos and conflict need constant information to work with. When you don't provide this information, they lose interest and move on to more accessible targets. This doesn't mean pretending everything is perfect or suppressing legitimate emotions. It means being strategic about who gets access to your vulnerable moments and choosing to process difficulties internally or with carefully selected trusted individuals. Lesson 11. Silence develops emotional independence. One of Jung's core beliefs was that psychological health requires emotional independence, the key to regulate your emotions and find meaning in your experiences without constant external input. When you habitually share everything that happens to you, you're essentially outsourcing your emotional processing to others. Jung noticed that people who constantly seek external validation for their feelings often struggle to develop their own emotional intelligence. They become dependent on other people's reactions to understand how they should feel about their own experiences. This creates what Jung might call emotional codependency, a state where your emotional well-being becomes tied to other people's responses rather than your own internal compass. You start needing others to tell you whether your feelings are valid, your reactions are appropriate, or your experiences are significant. By practicing selective sharing, you develop the psychological muscle of emotional self-reliance. You learn to sit with difficult feelings without immediately seeking comfort or validation from others. You discover that you have the inner resources to process complex emotions and extract wisdom from challenging experiences. This emotional independence doesn't mean isolation. It means approaching relationships from a place of strength rather than need, which Jung believed was essential for healthy human connections. Lesson 12. Your energy becomes more valuable when conserved. Jung understood something about human psychology that modern culture often ignores. Scarcity creates value. When you share your thoughts, feelings, and experiences freely with everyone, they become common currency. But when you're selective about what you share and with whom, your communications become more precious and impactful. Think about the people in your life whose words carry the most weight. Chances are, they're not the ones who constantly fill every silence with personal revelations. They're the individuals who speak thoughtfully, who choose their moments of vulnerability carefully, and who understand that meaningful communication requires intentionality. If you've made it this far in the video, you're clearly someone who values psychological wisdom over surface-level advice. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into transformative psychological insights. When you conserve your psychological energy through selective sharing, you have more resources available for the relationships and activities that truly matter to you. Lesson 13. Privacy allows for authentic self-discovery. Jung's entire work revolved around the process of individuation, becoming your authentic self rather than who others expect you to be. He discovered that this process requires periods of privacy and solitude where you can explore your thoughts, feelings, and reactions without external influence. When you constantly share your experiences, you're always performing to some degree. Even with close friends, there's an element of crafting your narrative for an audience. This performance, however subtle, can interfere with honest self-reflection and authentic self-discovery. Jung believed that some of our most important psychological insights come during quiet moments when we're not explaining ourselves to anyone. These are the moments when your true thoughts and feelings can emerge without the filter of social acceptability or the need to make sense to others. Lesson 14. Selective sharing creates deeper intimacy. Paradoxically, Jung understood that the path to deeper intimacy isn't through sharing everything with everyone, but through sharing the right things with the right people at the right times. When you practice discretion in most of your relationships, the moments when you do choose to be vulnerable become extraordinarily meaningful. Jung observed that the most profound human connections are built on a foundation of mutual respect for each other's inner worlds. When someone trusts you with something they don't share freely with others, you understand that you're receiving a gift of intimacy that has real value precisely because it's rare. This approach to relationships honors what Jung called the sacred nature of human psychology. Not everyone deserves access to your deepest self, and recognizing this isn't selfishness, it's wisdom. Lesson 15. Silence is a form of self-respect. The final lesson Jung would want you to understand is that choosing not to share everything about your life is ultimately an act of self-respect. It demonstrates that you value your inner world enough to protect it, that you understand your experiences have inherent worth beyond their entertainment value to others. Jung believed that people who practice appropriate psychological boundaries communicate something important about themselves. They're not desperate for attention, they don't need constant validation, and they understand that their worth isn't determined by how interesting their stories are to other people. This kind of self-respect is magnetic. It draws people who appreciate depth and mystery while repelling those who are only interested in surface-level drama and gossip. Conclusion. Carl Jung's wisdom about selective sharing isn't about becoming secretive or isolated. It's about becoming intentional with your psychological energy and creating the kind of inner strength that allows for truly authentic relationships and genuine self-discovery. In a world that profits from your oversharing and emotional reactivity, choosing silence becomes a radical act of self-preservation and self-respect. By implementing these 15 lessons, you're not just protecting your privacy, you're cultivating the kind of psychological maturity that Jung believed was essential for a meaningful life. Remember, not every thought needs to be spoken, not every experience needs an audience, and not every emotion needs external validation. Your inner world is sacred territory, and you get to decide who receives an invitation to explore it with you. The strongest people aren't those who share everything. They're those who've learned the power of holding their own counsel while still remaining open to meaningful connection when it truly matters.